Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava, and today I'm doing another episode of my Planets and Profile series. This one is on Mercury in the sign of Gemini. This actually rounds out my series on Mercury through the 12 signs, which I started about a year ago now, as I'm making this in July of 2021. So, the purpose of this series is to give people a sense of how each of the planets acts or behaves differently when placed in any of the different signs. And one of the main ways that we understand this is through something called the guest host relationship. So, when you take Mercury through the 12 signs, for example, one of the main ways that we start to understand what the meaning of Mercury in any given sign is has to do with whose temple Mercury is in, if not its own. So Mercury has two temples, Gemini and Virgo. We're going to talk about one of Mercury's home temples in Gemini today. But it's really important to understand that, for example, if we put Mercury into the temple of Aries, the ram, we are going to be looking at Mercury through its relationship with Mars, that Mercury is going to express itself in a Mars-like way when it is in the temple of the ram. Added to that, it's going to be in a cardinal or tropical sign. It's going to be a fire sign, a masculine sign. And then the actual position of Mars in a natal chart will matter if Mercury is in Aries. When Mercury is in one of its home signs, like Gemini, then the dynamic changes and Mercury is no longer dependent upon the blending or mixing of itself with another planetary deity. So that's one of the best things about Mercury being in Virgo or in Gemini, is that it's kind of like you or I being in your own home setting. You just feel more comfortable. So Gemini, let's go over the details of this sign. Gemini is the sign of the twins. And there's a lot of mythology that we could get into. We're not going to today, but you could unpack the mythologies surrounding the signs and usually pull some really good and relevant information from just the associated mythology over over thousands of years. But zodiacally speaking, we're talking about the last sign of spring. Zodiacal spring is understood from the orientation of the Northern Hemisphere, where horoscopic astrology came from. This is the last 30 days of the spring sort of quadrant of the zodiac. And in that last 30 days, you have the transition being made from the light of the light, which means that the days are getting longer, the arc of the sun in the sky is getting higher, moving up toward the North Star, and you're rising up. So it's kind of the yang of the yang. It's the light of the light. Once Gemini completes, then you're doing a turnabout, and you're moving as you hit the summer solstice marker, the light starts going downward. Now, all of these are symbolic metaphors that are an important part of the energetic, philosophical, archetypal fabric of the zodiac. So Gemini is this sign that represents the culmination of light as well as the immediate entropy when it reaches its culmination or peak. Because what happens in Cancer, the days start getting shorter, the arc of the sun starts coming down immediately, and we're going into the dark half of the light half of the year. Light half of the year would be from Aries through Virgo. Aries, Taurus, Gemini, it's light half of the year and light is rising. Gemini is the turning point of the year where we get to that point in Cancer at the summer solstice where the light starts waning. So that turning point, every season has one sign that signifies a turning point, critical turning point in the relationship between light and dark, either on the one half of the year or in the year overall, or both, really. So Gemini is a double-bodied sign, we call it, because of that. A double-bodied sign, sometimes in modern astrology, it'll be referred to as mutable. Double-bodied is the traditional name. The double-bodied airy temple of Mercury. And later, in the tradition, this sign in particular becomes the sign in which some people would say that the north node of the moon is exalted. Other people would say that this is the detriment or the exile of Jupiter. So some of those factors can be important in understanding as well. And, what do you have to understand about one of the things you have to understand about Mercury signs? They come at two moments when darkness is taking over and disintegration of the light is either beginning or completing itself. Jupiter signs, the polar opposite signs of Gemini and Virgo, Pisces, and Sagittarius, Jupiter signs, those signs have to do with turning points where the light is gaining or returning, taking over or returning. And in the signs of Sagittarius, turning into Capricorn where the light returns, or Pisces heading into Aries where the light takes over. So those double-bodied signs being ruled by Mercury and Jupiter have a lot to do with the construction of light and dark in the year as a kind of metaphorical language, much like the I Ching has alternations of light and dark and yin and yang. Okay, so all of that being said, when you're talking about Mercury in Gemini, you're talking about a place that is very quintessentially mercurial in that there's a deconstructive tendency, a tendency to take things apart, a tendency rather than the unity or cohesion or sense of things building towards some overarching ideal, there is the deconstruction of those things, the taking apart or the disintegrating of those things. You have qualities like skepticism, deconstruction, reason, questioning. You have articulation, you have interpretation, you have decoding, you have transfers of information, transfers of money, people running back and forth on basketball courts, an air traffic controller's tower, all of these kinds of images of things bustling, coming and going. And there is always a sense, a hidden sense of unity in the chaos with Mercury, just as with Jupiter, there is a hidden sense of entropy or decline or chaos in the unity. They're in each other, just like there's a speck of light and dark in the yin and yang. So to understand Mercury in Gemini, this airy temple, we also have to understand that air is a very, it's a very social element. It tends to want social stimulation and exchange, and it tends to, Mercury in Gemini in particular, tends to enjoy things that are sort of quintessentially mercurial and that they're changeable, they're stimulating, they're interesting, but not necessarily for too long. You might reach a conclusion only to flip or change your mind. So versatile, adaptable, changeable, flexible, somewhat ambivalent, ready to let go of something as quickly as it's taken up. Those are lots of the positive and, kind of just stereotypes that you hear, but this is where it's coming from. This idea that when things culminate in Gemini, they immediately turn into darkness. It's like the light is realized, some ideal is moved toward, and then immediately discarded. It's a very childlike sign in this regard. If you think of a cat finds something curious until all of a sudden disinterested. My daughters will find things, curious, interesting, fun for a little bit, and then the novelty wears off and they move on. This is in many ways the kind of beginner's mindset that we need as spiritual students, as people who, if you want to know why you're doing something, not just what you're doing, but why you're doing it, you need some good Mercury and Gemini type of energy. So at any rate, one of the things I like to do to illustrate or make the archetype in, the planet in the sign more understandable is to talk about people who have it. And so here's a list of some of the people who are born with Mercury and Gemini, high profile celebrities or historical figures that I think exemplify Mercury and Gemini pretty well. So I'm going to move okay, here we go. So, there's people who you can just feel that they're mercurial in the way that they act and behave, and just the way that they're, you don't necessarily know a lot of historical people outside of the media or outside of the way history tells their story. It's not like we know them personally, but what are they known for? What is their legacy? And these are some people who have some strong Mercury and Gemini-like traits. For example, Marilyn Monroe, very changeable, very shiftable, shifting personality. She was incredibly adept at maneuvering through the social hierarchies of Hollywood. If you've ever I've read her, some of her, not like full length bios, but I've read some of her lengthier bios online because I've taught her chart before in classes and seminars. Super smart at adapting, changing, finding different kinds of relationships that were advantageous, very crafty, woman, and very mercurial in the sense that she was curious, elusive, sometimes shy, sometimes not. And you'll find that quality of like, tough to pin down the personality sometimes. Now, of course, this will always combine with lots of other factors in a birth chart, but Marilyn Monroe has some really good sort of quintessential mercurial qualities that are on display in her chart. Tom Cruise, he's another one where it's just like, sometimes the way that I, not to be like judgmental or anything, but sometimes the way that I just describe Mercury and Gemini people is that you can't tell if you love them or if you think they're strange or if you're creeped out by them, sometimes all at once. Prince is very similar in, and I actually am a Prince fan, and there's this guy I know named Vincent who's diehard Prince fan, and he's from Prince, obviously from Minneapolis, and we met. Our next door neighbors were having like a book reading, and they next door neighbor was an author, and then he had some other authors over for like a backyard book reading. And one of the guys was a biographer of Prince who used to be like one of his photographers. And one of the words that he used to describe Prince was mercurial. Tupac, very similar. Tupac famously said, "Life is like a game, and I just want to go around the board as many times as I can before I die." But poets, wordsmiths, very changeable characters like Meryl Streep, I think she's won like a gazillion Oscars or Golden Globes or whatever. She is a very changeable, like a lot of actors will have strong Mercuries because they have to be able to change. And if you have Mercury in Gemini, you have a strong Mercury because it's well dignified. Russell Brand is another good example. Of course, I can get down with Russell Brand because he's gotten to be into bhakti yoga, and he's one of the people. I saw a video of him talking about Brazilian jiu-jitsu before I started lessons, and he was actually someone who kind of inspired me because of the way that he talked about it. He's very compelling and interesting, but he gets into lots of different things, and he's always like, I find that Mercury and Gemini people have a serpentine quality. They're very like just real shifty and funny and clever and quick. Bob Dylan, another great example of a wordsmith. Sometimes court players like Allen Iverson, Steffi Graf, Rafael Nadal, people who are like very masterful at games that require like a lot of back and forth. That'll be a strong Mercury person. Sometimes people who are very good at not having people detect who they really are or what they're really doing, because they can be very changeable in not such a good way, like Ted Kaczynski, Jeffrey Dahmer, need I say more? But also people who will have kind of gender fluid, or they'll be very fluid or mercurial in their sexual expression. People that come to my mind right away would be like Dennis Rodman or George Michael, if you guys know them a little bit. Another actress would be Kate Blanchett. Post Malone, if you guys know who Post Malone is. I can't remember what I saw. I saw an interview with him somewhere once. But he strikes me as a very mercurial. He has a lot of crossover in genres. Stevie Nicks, ability to have a solo career while also being part of a band. Sometimes just that a multiplicity, able to wear many hats. Sometimes you have much more like straight up rational, critical, almost existential, like Jean-Paul Sartre. I'm sure I'm not saying his name correctly for my French speaking people out there, but Lauryn Hill and Ice Cube. Again, the poet, singer, songwriter motif comes up really strongly with people like Tupac, Bob Dylan, Lauryn Hill, Ice Cube, people who are also really good critics or commentators and like comedians, quick-witted, like Joan Rivers. People who can pull in the attention or admiration of a very diverse audience. For example, Jordan Peterson. Now, I know as soon as you say the name Jordan Peterson, lots of people have strong reactions. Some people completely hate him. Some people completely love him. What I find interesting about him, not that I'm a huge fan, but I like more of his stuff than not. And when he's not talking about anything political, but just talking about Jungian things in particular. then I really like what he has to say about, just I like how he articulates and makes Jung's ideas accessible for people. But like people like, my mom, or like just lots of people in my life who I would say are like dyed in the wool Democrats, like left-leaning people who like Jordan Peterson, and then people who would consider themselves like, more right-leaning people that I know who like Jordan Peterson. And there's always this weird way in which people are trying to pin him down and like say what he is or isn't. And again, not that whether you like him or not, I'm not trying to create controversy here, but he's a very mercurial character in my mind, because um, he just, he's got that really sort of logical, very communicative, talking all the time. He's just kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of Terrence McKenna, not so much in terms of what he's talking about, but in terms of the way that he can just speak for like hours on end. Um, so anyway, he's an interesting one, though. The reason that I'm bringing him up is because you can set him next to someone else who has political relevance in a totally different way, but is also hugely controversial to people on both the right and the left, which was Edward Snowden. I lived in DC, and I remember we were on a yoga teacher training retreat. And again, you had people, really diverse group of people, most of which who worked in the government in DC on that retreat, debating about whether they thought what he did was good or not for a wide variety of reasons. And most of them were, most of them probably in our group were probably more on the liberal side of things politically, but there were other people there, conservative and liberal alike, who both agreed and disagreed about the topic. So I find that people who have something to contribute or say or do, who are really hard to pin down, or who find sympathy with people on all walks of life, will often be mercurial. Another example of such a person, Peter Dinklage. Do you guys know who he is? He played Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones. He is exactly this kind of individual that I'm talking about in that role. I don't know what he's like outside of it, but if one of your most iconic things that you do in your lifetime is to play this ultra mercurial character who has he's like a bad guy, but he's not a bad guy, but he is, but he isn't. See how that works? That can be very mercurial like that. People who tend to trigger everyone in different ways can be like that. Also, people who have like, like another I forgot to mention Allen Ginsberg earlier, who similarly attracted a very wide variety of people poetically. He has been studied, in very serious academic circles. He was popular among young people. Like he kind of caught a lot of different people's attention. Brian Wilson, someone who was kind of like someone who's the equivalent of like knowing 10 languages, but like musically. Brian Wilson. Wes Anderson, strange, peculiar, mercurial, kind of like his movies. If you were watch his movies have this kind of clever, satirical, dry, but fluid movement to them. Anyway, I think I mentioned Allen Iverson as a basketball player on the court too. Okay, so those are some of the people that come to my mind. If you know anybody with Mercury and Gemini, or if you have a different way of describing it, I would love to hear from you guys and hear what you think. I am never surprised to see Mercury and Gemini people do podcasting, media, writing, thinking, talking, speaking, people who are kind of good or smart with money or markets. So you'll see some of those traits too. I didn't pull up as many examples of some of those, but those are in there as well. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this talk on Mercury in the sign of Gemini. I've been meaning to do it for a while. And yeah, please leave your comments in the comment section below. Love hearing from you guys. All right, take it easy. Bye.